Hello everyone, welcome to my Last of Us Part 2, grounded difficulty, no damage, no crafting, no upgrades, no saves walkthrough, and this is Seattle Day 1 for Ellie section. And I've skipped out on a lot of the optional areas of Seattle Day 1, so I'm not going to be going to the bank, and I'm also not going to be going to other areas like the convoy, but I do go to the coffee shop, and then I also go to Barco's pet shop. And Barco's pet shop was an area I didn't include in my survivor difficulty walkthrough because I didn't know it was there, even though I picked up the key for it. And it turns out you do get a pistol holster, so if you want to get the pistol holster very early on in order to allow you to use the normal pistol and also the revolver at once, go for it. And it's just such a shame that the revolver didn't receive any kind of boost. And you know, the revolver from the first Last of Us was a great tool because it one-shot killed enemies. And because it one-shot killed enemies and there wasn't a lot of ammo for it, you saved it for very special occasions. And when you use the revolver in those special occasions, it really shined as a weapon. But the revolver on this game just isn't that good. I don't really find myself using it a lot. And I find it better just to use a normal pistol in certain situations. It's just such a shame that grounded difficulty just didn't live up to my expectations. But this encounter right here is very simple. I'm using the method for diving to prone in order to move very quickly, and also quietly at the same time. I'm still wondering what causes my character to go left or right, and I think it has to do with the geometry in the way, because it seems to happen predominantly whenever I'm near any kind of geometry, because I think the character is factoring in that there is a piece of geometry in the way, so it influences the action that occurs whenever you try to jump off the ground. And I just think it's really dumb, because it just leads to a lot of moments where you'll end up being spotted for some really dumb reasons, and then it just removes your level of control over the system, and it's almost like the game's taking control of it for you, which is not something you want when it comes to a gameplay mechanic. But we've just done that section, and now we're just going to transition over to the courthouse area. The strategy for this section is exactly the same as it was in my survivor difficulty walkthrough. It's just you gotta be a little bit more cautious, because the enemies can see you very quickly on grounded difficulty now. And also, something I need to discuss, I think there was actually a bug present in Ellie Seattle Day 1 that they patched with this most recent patch. Because you'll notice, if you look at my inventory, I have a Molotov cocktail. On my survivor difficulty walkthrough, I didn't have a Molotov for this particular chapter. And I think it's a bug because I don't think the game recognized at the time that the Molotov that you picked up in Jackson actually was something you carried over, so it just got rid of the Molotov, and it was really dumb that it worked like that, so I'm glad they fixed it, and it makes the school sequence with the humans so much easier, because the first encounter with the humans is one of my least favorite encounters in the game, because the humans are so bullcrap at what they can do. They can be very omniscient at times, with just going into an ambush position, and just moving in such a way that they'll be able to spot you if you don't sit in a particular spot, and the Molotov really helps in controlling the spawn because I'm able to get rid of 2 enemies very quickly, and then all I have to deal with is just 3 more enemies. And I just think that encounter with the humans works so much better when you're not being forced into a mandatory combat encounter, but because it puts you into a mandatory combat encounter, it just opens the humans up to being very bullcrap. And not only that, but your AI partner also screws you a lot in that encounter, because unfortunately, for some bizarre reason, they've neglected a fundamental mechanic from the first Last of Us, where you had the ability to share a cover spot with your AI, but on this game, they don't have that, so the amount of times you're going to get your cover stolen by the AI in that school sequence, and then she just pushes you out of cover, and it allows the enemies to spot you, and because of that, you're forced to go prone so that the AI doesn't take your cover, but because you're prone, you can't throw your bottles or your Molotovs very efficiently. It's just It's so dumb, and it shouldn't have been something they overlooked. The fact that it occurred is just something that is completely unacceptable. And if you look right now, when you're seeing the AI in action during this combat sequence, the AI is amazing. But in that encounter with the humans, the AI is absolutely horrendous. It's one of the few encounters on this game where the AI really screws you. So that's yet again another reason why you want to use the Molotov as quickly as possible so that you're not having to deal with so many enemies. But this combat encounter right now is so easy because the machete kills these enemies very quickly. I didn't even know the machete could actually kill these enemies in 2 hits. And obviously with the clickers, it takes 4 hits because they're a more durable enemy, but because of how durable they are, it's best to shoot them in the head and then punish them with an animation, because that's a Resident Evil 4 design that I really appreciate. And then we have a couple of stragglers, but Dina is going to help me out with clearing them out. And there's a clicker right there, but I'm just going to shoot it in the head and just finish it off. That guy right there can be very cheeky, because he spawns behind you, but he's going after Dina. And I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like on grounded difficulty, the clickers flail about more frequently and they're a lot faster. But I find that because of that, it makes it easier to hit their heads, because they converge back into the default position for their head quicker than usual. So it allows me to hit their head more easily. But I just think that's probably a trick of the mind, though. Maybe their speed isn't any different. It's probably just me. But we're in the coffee shop, and there's just one encounter with an infected. And this is where you can get the key for Barco's pet shop. And you also notice I'm fighting the enemies a little bit differently in melee combat. So the method I recommended for fighting enemies in melee combat is not the way you want to do it. This is how you want to do it. So the way you want to handle enemies in melee combat when you're playing as Ellie is when it comes to the normal runners, you'll want to hit the runners twice, then dodge, and then finish them off. Because you're doing 6 hits in order to finish off the enemies, you do 2 hits to stun the enemies, and then you want to dodge, and it's best to do 2 hits, because Ellie's dodge isn't so delayed when she does only 2 hits. When she does 3 hits, the dodge is a little delayed, so it's best to do 2 hits, then dodge, and then you're able to finish off the enemies with the remaining 4 hits, and they won't be able to counterattack you. And then when it comes to Abby, Abby doesn't need to do 2 hits and then dodge. She can do 3 hits and then dodge, because for some reason, when she does the 3 hits, her dodge isn't delayed compared to Ellie. I don't know why this is the case, but it really doesn't matter in the long run. But we have a stealth encounter right here, and that right there, you can still get the drop on the enemies whenever they spot you if you are able to touch their sides or somehow get behind them. It's something I saw Anthony Caliber do, and it's something I've recognized myself, but I've never been able to capitalize on it. But take advantage of that whenever the enemies are very close to spotting you. It's just, it doesn't work very efficiently on humans. It works a lot better on infected, because I think their posture allows their sides and their back to be opened up a lot more frequently compared to the posture that the humans go into whenever they do that grace period animation. But there's only a couple more enemies. And I'm going to take out the guy on the left. I normally don't do this encounter stealthily, because isolating these enemies can be very difficult. Oh, and watch this, by the way. You see that? There is no way I should have been able to grab her just then, because normally when I take that long with the humans, I never get the grab option. But with the infected, it's different. Very interesting that it works like that. So, yeah, you're definitely given a lot more leniency with the infected compared to the humans. But right now, I'm showcasing a method that could potentially help you against multiple enemies, but it's not very efficient, because as you'll see right now, the enemies are very delayed when it comes to attacking, and oftentimes, they initiate their ground attacks very late for some reason, so you can end up getting hit during the dodge animation. So, don't use that method too much, just only use it on very rare occasions. But the delay it gives you does allow you to control some of the enemies, and if you're diving to prone a lot, it can definitely help in shooting the enemy's legs, so that you can open them up to being grabbed or being susceptible to a strike animation. And once again, you have to make sure you're holding L1 while you're dodging, and then you have to hold circle so that you actually dive to prone. And then you need to wait for the enemies to attack, and then dodge, and then repeat the process. And that is the best way you want to use the dive to prone when it comes to engaging in combat. So we now have the dreaded school sequence that I've trivialized because of the Molotov that is actually in my inventory compared to how the game was originally before this patch. So what you need to do is you need to make sure your stamina is fully regenerated before you decide to do what I'm about to do. Then you need to place your reticle in the correct spot while you're running, and then you need to throw your Molotov. You will most likely kill 2 enemies, although you might get a moment where one enemy will die, but then the other enemy will have their arm or their leg set on fire, and if that happens, you need to shoot them so that you ensure that they die. And because I've placed my last one position right there, the enemies are going to investigate near that spot. I mean, there might be a rare moment where they decide to circle around the shelves on my end and spot me, but I need to make sure my bottle is up, because the bottle is the quickest way of ensuring that the enemies don't immediately fire upon you. And I'm using a bottle right there to draw these 2 enemies away from me. I'm going to take out this guy, and all that's left now are 2 enemies. And I'm just going to wait for the enemies to isolate themselves, and I'm going to take them out. I think the enemies, they don't really seem to have any kind of changes to their mentalities, because I believe on grounded difficulty, the enemies maintain more of a group mentality, so they would oftentimes group together, but I never really noticed it, because I never really got into a situation where I put the enemies into an investigative state, and then they've just been able to group together. But the enemies, from what I've noticed, whenever they go into an investigative status, they always seem to be separated from each other. They don't seem to group up together as much, so it's a good thing that that is the case, because then it makes the AI a lot more balanced. But I know she's going to investigate that corner just then, because she was closer to that side, and the moment she decided to investigate that corner, she was done for, and there's only one enemy left. And there's really no point in doing a stealth attack on them, just do a strike animation, because there aren't any other enemies present in this section, there's only him. So he's coming my way, so I'm just going to wait for him to come over. I mean, I don't have to wait for such a long time, because if he goes into the grace period animation, I can take him out with the strike animation. And what you have just seen is the best way to handle the school sequence, without any kind of crafting, without any kind of upgrades. And I am just glad this is the case, because I really dislike this sequence. I mean, it's only this encounter right here, because it's a forced mandatory encounter that you can escape and go back into stealth, but it's just hard to do so because the enemies are so erratic in their movements, and 5 enemies exhibiting very erratic movements is a recipe for disaster. But now we have just a very consistent stealth encounter coming up. So that's why I always clear out those enemies, because if the enemies are in an investigative state and they, say for instance, like call out to somebody, or they acknowledge like a dead body, then they affect the pathing on the enemies here, and that's not what you want. And these enemies will not be able to do their dialogue, indicating that the consistent strategy is about to occur. And what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to go prone on that side. I'm going to wait for this guy to complete his path, and then I'm going to take out that woman over there. But don't take her out too quickly, because there's a guy inside the cafeteria, and if you take out this woman here, Dina should take him out. But if you kill this woman too quickly, there's a chance that the enemy inside the cafeteria will do a turning animation, and that will prevent Dina from going in for the kill. So I'm just waiting a little bit. I'm going to wait a little bit more, and then this should cause Dina to go for the kill, which she does. So be very patient when it comes to taking out these enemies. And then after you kill 2 enemies, there's going to be an additional spawn of 3 enemies. Their pathing is kind of random, but they go off in kind of the same general direction. And you can use the bottle here in order to distract the enemies and open them up to being susceptible to stealth attacks. And the grass here is very powerful in case you get spotted, because the enemies can't see you very well whenever you're in the grass and you're at quite a long range from them. And it makes using the last one position mechanic very reliable when it comes to using the grass. But I'm going to remain prone, and I'm going to throw the bottle over there so that I can most likely lure the enemies away. It's just when you're prone, you don't throw the bottles that great of a distance. And if I was to blind fire, I could have thrown it a further distance away. But the problem is that the bottles have a tendency of auto-locking to enemies that are way out of your line of sight. And it can be very annoying when it happens, so you have to really make sure that the enemies are very far off camera, so that the bottle doesn't automatically lock onto them. But I get spotted right there, but the grass helps out. Like, see how powerful the grass is? This is incredible. It helps balance out these atrociously designed enemies on grounded difficulty. So I take him out, and because I got into combat, Dina's not going to be able to take out this guy, so I'm going to have to do all the dirty work. I personally think that the AI should always go in for the stealth kill, regardless of whether the AI can see them or not, and regardless of whether you go into a combat status or not, because it should be rewarding. You shouldn't have to waste so much time trying to take out one single enemy that your AI partner, who is just as capable as you, can easily take out. I just think it's padding, and it just drags out the gameplay for no other reason other than to accommodate for developers' fault. But right now, we're making our way over to the final part of the encounter, which is very consistent, and you do not have to deal with any of the enemies, because the enemies will always go off on a scripted path as long as you take out the enemies previously. Here's a chance to pick up some revolver ammo. And the moment I pick up the supplies, the enemies are going to spawn in. But all I'm going to do right here is hug this side of the building, and I'm just going to go underneath these solar panels. And I'm going to go back into a crouch position whenever I exit the underside of these solar panels, so I can move a little bit faster. But I don't think it matters, because the enemies still give you enough time to get to this door. And when I exit this solar panel, I'm going to use the dive to prone method in order to move a little bit faster. And one thing I highly recommend if you're trying to get through such sequences very quickly is when you're using the dive to prone method, make sure you are going sideways, because when you dive to prone sideways, your character covers a greater distance. So it's a faster method, but it can be very awkward to control your character sideways, because it's very hard to tell where your character is going at times. But I pick up that trap mine, which you should already know where it is if you watched my previous walkthrough. And now we're on this stealth encounter, which, instead of going on the left path, I take this path because I'm not having to run the gambit with getting spotted by that sniper too much. And there's all this grass over here. It's very easy to get past these guys. There's only 2 enemies you have to worry about. There's just that sniper, and then there's another guy to the right. Right over there, you can see him. So I'm just going to wait for these 2 enemies to turn around. But I'm going to wait a little bit longer because there's always the possibility that they might do turning animations. And I've said it before, and I'll say it again, I disagree so much with the turning animations. Granted, difficulty has just made the turning animations even worse when the enemies can spot you even faster than before. And I need to showcase the bloopers involving the turning animations. Like, I had a really silly moment happen in Seattle Day 2 of Ellie section, where I'm in the hospital, and there's this guy who's walking right towards me. He goes into a turning animation, but with how clunky the turning animations are, it causes him to go in a full circle, and it completely messes up his pathing. And not only that, but I also get moments where the enemies skip moments where they're supposed to stand still whenever they do turning animations, and oftentimes they don't even have to do the turning animation. It's just the points where they stand still aren't properly programmed, so there are times when they can just skip it for no reason. It's just so dumb that it works like that. The hospital infiltration encounter of Ellie Seattle Day 2 is one of my least favorite encounters in the game, because that section is prone to a lot of RNG, and it's RNG that shouldn't even be there because of how clunky the AI is designed in this game. Like, I get moments where an owner and her dog get stuck on a corner because she herself gets stuck on the dog. I get moments where enemies just randomly go on different paths. I get moments where turning animations happen for no reason, and then it causes their pathing to be completely screwed up. It's one of the worst parts of the game, and grounded difficulty has just made that encounter worse. So I've had to completely rethink my strategy for that section, and hopefully it's gonna work in this walkthrough, because I did it on the encounter select, and of course with the encounter select you're afforded like upgrades that you don't want, because that's one of the biggest problems with the encounter select. It gives you upgrades you don't want at all. Like, I wish there was an option to turn off upgrades for the encounter select so that you just have a base Ellie or a base Abby. And another thing I really wish they would change about the encounter select is the amount of ammo they give you. The amount of times I spawn in with no ammo for my weapons is just too much for the encounter select. Yeah, the encounter select on this game is horrible. It's definitely the worst part of the game, and it really brings down this game's quality significantly when you're trying to test out the mechanics of this game. And one thing could have easily fixed the encounter select. They should have made it where when you pick an encounter, it spawns you in with the resources and the upgrades that you had in the chapter select, so that you're not having to run the gambit with the RNG of spawning in with different resources every single time in the encounter select. Like, whoever programmed the encounter select on this game needs to be fired. It's just so bad, and considering that Uncharted 4 had a significantly better encounter select system that was not prone to a lot of really stupid errors, there's no excuse whatsoever. But we've just done that stealth encounter, which is still well designed, and I really enjoy that encounter. Grounded difficulty does not negatively impact that stealth encounter. The strategies work just the same. And then we move on to the TV station, which is honestly one of my favorite parts of the game, because it really takes survival horror in a different direction with putting in horror in the middle of the day. And just the atmosphere of that whole entire area, I think it's perfect. Like, it's far better than what you typically see in your standard survival horror game, and I think at times it feels better than the atmosphere that Resident Evil does. It's better than the atmosphere that Resident Evil 2 Remake established, because it was just such a generic atmosphere that really didn't capture anything. It was just so cliched in Resident Evil 2 Remake, but this one, it feels very innovative. You know, it goes beyond the typical cliches of survival horror, where they oftentimes expect survival horror to be taking place during the dark, and it just doesn't, you know, feel like anything special. But this one is just truly amazing. Like, the music that plays in this stealth encounter especially, I really like the music here. I think it's one of the creepiest pieces of music in the game. And I've even recorded the music for myself just so I can hear it and play it for different scenes from like games or from movies. And it helps give off a different kind of feeling when I'm looking at those scenes. It's an experimental process that I really like doing, and it's just such a fun experience. Like trying to combine like music from like Resident Evil and putting it for like kids shows. I do it oftentimes for like Scooby Doo or like other shows like that, and it really gives it a different kind of feeling, and I really enjoy it. And ironically, it was Scooby Doo that actually inspired me to do my Alien Isolation walkthrough, but I think I'll elaborate on that when I do my first part for my Alien Isolation walkthrough. But we now have this encounter right here, which the strategy is exactly the same as it was on Survivor difficulty, only I'm going to have to wait a little bit longer for the second part of this encounter where I need to use a distraction, because as I've already mentioned, the enemies see you very quickly on grounded difficulty. So you don't have to worry about these two enemies. These two enemies will always do the exact same pattern, although there is a rare instance where they don't do it, but it hasn't occurred to me. It's like a 1% chance of happening. So this strategy works 99% of the time. And all I'm waiting for is for that guy on the right to move past the cubicle. And then once he moves past the cubicle, I'm going to be able to get past him. And I'm going to uncrouch at a particular point so that I move a little bit faster. And I'm going to go to the staircase that they came from, and that is where I'm going to use the distraction to my advantage. So you'll want to stand up right around here after you get past that desk so that he doesn't hear you. And then wait here. I really love this encounter. Like, I love how intimidating this encounter is. The wolves are scared, and you're scared of the wolves. There's fear all around you in this whole entire encounter. It's such a cool encounter. I really wish this game went down this route a little bit more. Because there aren't that many moments in The Last of Us Part 2 that feel just as dark as this particular part of the game. And this game is a lot more dark compared to the first Last of Us. And I think that's one of the main reasons why I like this game. Because I think a dark atmosphere and just the way this game handles its survival horror aspect in a way that is completely unique from other survival horror games, it would have made for a really fun experience. But because I got detected by the enemies a little bit, it's caused these enemies to spawn in, so you need to run. You always will get into a combat encounter, and as long as you are staying on the move and you take the path exactly like how I take it, you will not be shot by the enemies. And when you get over here, you need to hug the left-hand side because there are going to be a bunch of people right above you, and whenever you hug the left-hand side, they just can't hit you very well. But you need to go over to the right-hand side right over here because there are enemies in front of you, and the moment you get through this door, that is the end of this combat encounter. Now, for this encounter right here, you need to restart the checkpoint so that the enemies are always going to be in that position. And then when you get past that vending machine, you need to dodge 3 times. And then I'm going to use the dive to prone method to move a little bit faster. There is a chance that one enemy might see you for a little bit, but not enough to go into an investigative status. And then when these enemies go past you, that is your opening to get out of here. Obviously, this is not going to work on the permadeath mode. But of course, for the permadeath mode, you can just play on like easy difficulty and just decimate the enemies. It's not that big of a deal. But I will say, though, I'm not too sure why Naughty Dog decided to implement a permadeath mode. I always view permadeath as being a lack of respect for the story you've established for your characters, because if you die at any point in a game and you're having to retrace your steps of just going through the story and just seeing all the same cutscenes again and just doing all the same encounters again, it almost comes across as being very arrogant in some degrees. I mean, Naughty Dog has given 3 different permadeath modes. There are permadeath modes for just like individual sub-chapters, for a whole entire act, and also for the whole game, but I can't imagine why you would ever want to implement permadeath mode for a game that's as long as this, and for a game that has a really intricate story and a lot of cutscenes. And all you're going to be doing is just turning the cutscenes on this game into loading screens whenever you're just trying to go through a permadeath mode. And they just will not achieve the same amount of impact. I don't understand what they were thinking when they designed this. Like, I would have much rather they make it where when you die, you lose your whole progress, but for the checkpoints, you can just restart the checkpoints whenever you're in a tight spot. That's what Rocksteady, or, I'm sorry, not Rocksteady, that's what Warner Brothers did for Batman Arkham Origins, and the permadeath mode in Batman Arkham Origins was a lot of fun, because once you beat the game, you could die and just go through the full game again with all the New Game Plus items that you had. And this ensured that you did not have to play the game at a base level where everything was just not very challenging in order to unlock New Game Plus again on the new file. It was just a very tedious process in the games before Batman Arkham Origins. And I was hoping that Rocksteady would do the same with Batman Arkham Knight, but they didn't. They reverted back to the older model, which I was not a big fan of, unfortunately. But enough about that. We just did an encounter with the Shamblers. I had to change up my strategy against the Shamblers because that first Shambler kept on spotting me for no reason. And it was only because he was getting very close to me. And with the increased awareness on the enemies, they're more aware of your presence whenever you're close to them. And I use the dive to prone method in order to move very fast so that I can get to that runner and just kill him and then get rid of the second runner, because Dina never goes for the second runner. And then in that timing, I'm able to get the section done. And now we move on to this encounter right here, where you need to restart the checkpoint in order to ensure the pattern works as follows. This will never work on the very first instance of starting the encounter, so once again, on the Permadeath mode, this would never work. But who cares about Permadeath? Just play it on easy difficulty. I really have no respect for Permadeath in games. Aside from Batman Arkham Origins, as I've already explained. But that pattern right there, you've got to make sure that the Shambler doesn't spot you too quickly or hear you. And then you've got to make sure you're moving very slowly so that the enemies don't hear you. And then we have this little encounter right here, which is not difficult in the slightest. All you're doing is just doing a strike animation on that guy. And then a couple of moments where you have to do a quick time event in order to save yourself. And then just going down this one path, otherwise you'll get killed by the enemies, because there are a lot of enemies in this encounter. And then once you've done this little subway sequence, that will be the end of Seattle Day 1 for Ellie's section. I am going to show one blooper at the end of this video, because it showcases why the AI is such a big problem in the school sequence, and why the removal of the mechanic of being able to share a cover spot with your AI is just completely stupid in this game. So right here, I'm doing this method here because I didn't have a Molotov, because this was before the patch, I believe. And I'm hiding in this spot right here so that I can lure these two enemies over to where I am, and I'm going to use a bottle right there, but because the AI is occupying my spot right now, she ends up pushing me out of the cover, and that allows the enemy to spot me, and I get into combat. This is precisely why I have to use a Molotov for this sequence, because getting rid of as many enemies as you can, and then getting back into a stealth profile will help ensure that you are not getting screwed by your friendly AI, and you're also not getting screwed by the bullcrap of these enemies. But that is the end of Seattle Day 1 for Ellie's section. Stay tuned for the future parts. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.